Well, I lack any graphs, and I'm going to avoid long, impassioned pauses, so whether this actually counts as a TED Talk is up for debate. My name's Phil Allcock. I'm the Associate Vicar at Christ Church Mayfair, so up in central London, and in God's kindness, we have a good chunk of Gen Z and Gen Y workers, especially in our evening congregation. And for those of you playing Quiet Revival bingo, we, on the positive side, we've had in the last couple of years a young man converted who only came along to church because we were doing a men's breakfast engaging with the teachings of Jordan Peterson. But on the negative side, again, Quiet Revival stuff has been playing itself out in that we've seen two very keen young guys go to Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. It is undeniably true, actually, in the last year we have seen greater numbers, and especially greater numbers of young men. The truth, though, is that we are finding evangelism every bit as much hard graft as it always has been. And I don't think that's different from anybody I talk to. With that caveat in mind, as we think about reaching young workers, I want to offer you three anecdotal observations, three bits of anecdata, if you like, and one key factor. Three anecdotal observations and one key factor. Because some things have shifted a bit. And always the danger, I think, in our church outreach is that we're pointing towards a previous generation. We are brilliant at training people to answer yesterday's questions. And our preaching is very well applied to yesterday's issues. Now, you can overstate these things, and it would be foolish to think that any generation is a sort of monolithic whole with exactly the same ideas running across. But let me offer three things that I think we need to engage with if we're going to be effective in outreach to the younger generation. The first thing that we're observing is that they face some different issues with work. The younger generation face some different issues with work. The landscape of work really has changed pretty profoundly in the last 20 years. Nothing encapsulates that change, I think, more than the ubiquitous acronym WFH. Work-free holiday, as we all know. And it has a big impact on evangelism, actually. It's very hard to share the good news of Jesus with people if you're never with them. We did a little informal survey of our evening congregation, just asked the young workers, how many of you have had an opportunity to share something of your faith, something of the good news of Jesus Christ in the last 12 months? And encouragingly, we found around 80% of them reckoned they'd been able to do that. Then said, okay, stick up a hand if that opportunity, that evangelistic engagement was with somebody you only knew remotely online. Almost all the hands went down. Now this matters because Gen Z is the lonely generation. And one of the things that came out in talking to a number of the youngest folk at church was that they said, we are lonely and we lack the connections and relationships that the older generations seem to have. And that matters because so often the soil in which evangelism grows is deep, rich relationships. And that's something we're going to have to help them with. But it's not just attendance at work that has changed. Attitudes towards work have also changed. And in particular, what we're seeing is that for the younger generations, for Gen Y and Gen Z, that there's a disillusionment with work. And again, this actually does have an impact on sharing the gospel. Because if the data is to be trusted, when you're talking about workers under the age of 30-ish, then for every one of them for whom work is an idol that needs exposing, there'll probably be two of them who just can't be bothered with work and who are utterly unmotivated. Now, that's not an enormous surprise, given that a number of surveys have shown around 60% of Gen Z, the youngest generations of 18 to 25, well, I mean, people change where they cut it off, but around 60% of the youngest generation of workers say that they have absolutely no hope whatsoever of ever getting to the point where they own a home. So what's the point? What's the point in really flogging themselves at work if there's no payout at the end? That's quite a big change that's happened. Another factor which is feeding into this less than enthusiastic attitude to work is the well-documented mental health crisis. So these are generations for whom their experience of university was shaped by lockdown, ruined by lockdown, who experienced the global panic of the pandemic and then have seen the economy flatline on the better forecasts and are now experiencing the threat of warfare return to Western Europe. It's no surprise that they are far more fragile than older generations when it comes to mental health issues. And a number of them are asking, why would I risk my well-being by absolutely flogging myself to build a career when the payout looks so poor and so questionable? So there are some real questions in there about how they view work compared with the people we're used to engaging with. And we need to understand that if we're going to apply the gospel wisely and well to them. Because when we hold out the hope of Jesus Christ, actually they're asking different questions. And we need to understand them if we're going to show them how the hope of Jesus Christ meets their ultimate needs and the needs that they're aware of as well. So they're facing some different issues at work. You can overstate it, but they're facing some different issues at work. They're also asking some different questions of faith. They're asking some different questions when it comes to faith. So I think you can summarize it this way. They're not asking, is God real? They're asking, do I like him? It's not, does God exist? Give me the arguments. It's more, do I approve of this God? So very few people are now coming into our church with a copy of Dawkins' God Delusion tucked under their arm and atheist arguments in their mind. Instead, they come to us having been swimming in this vague soup of spirituality and ideas about manifesting that are shaped by a multiverse of influences, most of whose names we've never heard and may not even exist in a year's time, and yet who are shouting for their attention in contradictory ways from their phones every single day. There is a huge confusion. And so that's shaping the questions that come out. When I look at the Christianity Explored courses we've done in the last few years and the questions that are coming up in church, the questions have shifted. There are far fewer questions about how can I believe Jesus really rose from the dead? And you're not actually asking me to accept miracles really happened. Not none, but far fewer. Instead, there are far more questions about the sexual ethics of the Bible and the lifestyle to which Jesus calls us. And so again, if we're going to be effective in sharing the universal hope that works for all people in all generations, we need to be able to explain to them and sell them a vision of the positivity of biblical sexual ethics, to show them why the Bible's teaching is really good for women, and to explain why the cross-shaped life is actually the path of human flourishing, and to do those things in a way which is biblically compelling and is apologetically winsome and holds water, has real integrity. So there are some differences in the issues they're facing at work. There are some differences in the questions that they're asking about faith. There is also some more openness just to come along to church, which is terrific. The Bible Society's survey, which I imagine a number of you have seen, we're not quite tracking with that in our experience at church, but we have seen an uptick in numbers, and especially amongst young men, which is a wonderful change from the last 30 years. But they come in more easily in one sense. They're quite happy just to come to church. They don't need an axe-throwing event where there's a 5-minute talk at the end about how Jesus is the true and better axe head for chopping through the issue of guilt or whatever. You know, they're unfamiliar with Christianity. A lot of them have not been taught it at school, and so they want to encounter full-fat, real Christianity, not a sort of watered-down, seeker-sensitive version that has stripped out anything liturgical or spiritual. And so lots of them are just happy. They want to come to church and see what it actually is. I mean, it was extraordinary. We did Leviticus in our small groups in the last term, and for various reasons I was nervous. But the striking thing was the people who seemed to enjoy it most were the baby Christians, the new young people. They just really enjoyed the weirdness and the richness of it all. So there are some major differences in what we're seeing. And look, you'll have to work out for yourself in your context whether you're seeing the same things in the people who are coming to your churches and how you respond and how you shape your outreach to match with that. But I want to turn from a focus on the people we're seeking to reach, the young workers who are not in church, to the people who are doing the reaching, the young Christians in our churches, and to look at what I think is the one key factor. I was going to call it the one dirty secret, but even for a TED talk, that's felt a little bit clickbaity. So we'll just call it the one key factor. And it's not a choral evensong to sort of surf the liturgical vibe of Gen Z, but if you've got the building and you've got the voice, you go for it. Sung Eucharist when you've got a voice like a cat being ironed is not a way to reach out, so I shan't be. But, okay, so what is the one key factor? Let me come at it this way. There are always in our church a couple of people dating unbelievers. There are always a couple it's a very small number. And yet, as I look back at Christianity Explored courses and events and other courses we've run in the last 20 years, every single one of them has had an unbeliever there who's been brought by a Christian girlfriend. Now, pause. I am 100% not about to advocate missionary dating as the great evangelistic strategy. Don't worry. That is a terrible idea for all the obvious reasons, and it's still very much true that the likely outcome is always more often that the Christian stops going to church than the non-Christian ends up baptized. But we got to wondering, why is it that this very small group of people, statistically in our church, who are spiritually in a pretty bad place, they're dating an unbeliever, and yet statistically, they seem to be so effective at bringing unbelievers to church. And we got to change what's going on. What is it in particular that they share with the most effective evangelists in church? And here's what we concluded, and you can tell me whether you think this is nonsense or not. I'm not teaching the Bible at this point. I'm sharing observations that have played out in our church. I think it's because they care. They really, really care. They've bogged it. They're dating a non-Christian. They know they shouldn't. They're probably not in a great place, but they know enough to know it really matters that this person puts their trust in Christ. And they care for this person. They really care for them. That's what they seem to share with the really effective evangelists in church, that both groups just really, really care. And so they will find a way to keep going with the invitations, to persist, to ask, to invite, to plead. And in one sense, I think what we've observed is something, it's not true for young workers, it's true for every generation. And I think it's true across all categories of church, that the key to effective outreach is people who really care about the lost. Paul declares in 2 Corinthians 5, the love of Christ compels me. And the key to improving our outreach amongst young workers and indeed amongst every group is that we ourselves and we teach our people to love unbelievers the way Christ loves them, to see them the way Christ sees them, to care for their eternal fate the way Christ cares for their eternal fate. That's the key. It's not radical, it's not new, it's not particularly insightful. It's people who care. Now, it's true, it's worth just mentioning that there'll be some in Gen Z who simply don't have the meaningful connections that usually are necessary before good evangelistic opportunities appear, and we'll have to help them with that. But I think it's far more the case that what our churches need is to grow in our care, in our love for the unbelievers. There is something happening. We are seeing some more encouraging signs in our culture. That is, I think, undeniable now. There's just enough data going around all the churches that there is something happening. The question is not whether there is a little bit more openness now. The question is, will we use the connections we do have so that they count for Christ? Will we care enough to take advantage of this moment? And that's our task, is to lead the way and to teach the people so this happens.